Let's go back to those thousands of victims of the contaminated blood scandal in the UK who will receive £100,000 each in compensation from the government. The announcement follows a recommendation made last month by the chair of the public inquiry into what's been described as the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS. We're joined now by Dame Diana Johnson. She's chair of the all-party parliamentary group on haemophilia and contaminated blood. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. What is your reaction to this announcement?
Well, I'm very pleased that the government have announced formally that interim payments will be made for those people who are currently receiving financial support under the support schemes. However, there are many people who will not receive any of the interim payments, particularly parents or children of those who received contaminated blood. So it's a welcome first step. I also ought to say that I know you just referred to the fact that Sir Brian Langstaff made a recommendation just last month, but actually Sir Robert Francis made this recommendation for interim payments in March of this year. So the government have had this recommendation sitting there for quite some time, and I am pleased they've made it now, but it has taken much longer than I think it should have done. They should have done this straight away back in March.
And you're talking there about you would like this to have been done sooner this year, but I mean this whole scandal goes back many years, 5 decades. Can you just explain why it has taken so long to get to this point?
Well, that's a very good point, and that's why it was very important to have the public inquiry established. So the reason why it's taken so long could be looked at. The cover-ups, the lack of engagement from successive governments to deal with this problem, the fact that people felt great stigma who'd received infected blood and perhaps got hepatitis C or HIV. There's a whole story here that needs to be unpacked by the infected blood inquiry, and we're looking forward to the recommendations by Sir Brian, which will be made next year. So it's absolutely right that, you know, it's 4 or 5 decades now that people have had to fight, you know, literally to get to this point of some interim payments for some of the people affected, not everybody. But hopefully next year we will get those final recommendations, and we'll have Sir Brian's thoughts and views about why it's taken so long and what actually happened over these 50 years. Do
you have any view on what the final level of payments should be? It's obviously a hard thing to put a value, a financial value, on what these people have endured and have lost.
I think that's absolutely right, and that's one of the reasons we welcome the government establishing the side inquiry under Sir Robert Francis to look at a compensation framework. So that's ready to go once the final recommendations are made by Sir Brian Langstaff next year. The piece of work to establish how compensation should be decided has already been done by Sir Robert Francis, and we're hoping now that the government will accept all of his recommendations that he made in that report in March, ready to go for next year, and then to look at quantum, because you're absolutely right, it will be incredibly difficult to actually set the figures of what has happened to people. People's lives have been destroyed, families have been destroyed, people have died, people continue to die. There's roughly on average 1 person dying every 4 days. Over 400 people have already died since the public inquiry was established. So we look forward to the report, the final report from Sir Brian, but we hope very much that compensation will flow very quickly after that report has been published next year.
How much has this process helped the people who have been affected by it, at least having their story now properly listened to and understood?
I think it's been very important, and the reason I got involved with this is because of my constituent who came to me in 2010 and said what he wanted was a public inquiry. He wanted to find out why this was allowed to happen. Originally he was infected with dirty blood and developed hepatitis C, and no one had ever explained why this was allowed to happen. So I think telling your story, explaining how it's affected you and your family is really important. And I do pay tribute actually to Sir Brian Langstaff and his team at the public inquiry, because he's been very clear that he wanted to put those infected and affected at the heart of the inquiry. So it was their inquiry, they could tell their story, and they were able to do that at the beginning. And I understand at the end of the inquiry, again, he will hear further testimony and evidence from people about what's happened to them and their lives, and that's been incredibly powerful and important.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Dame Diana Johnson.